Welcome to the Sound of Ideas from IdeaStream Public Media. I'm Stephanie Haney. Thank you for joining us. Today's conversation is all about student loans, both federal and private. The Trump administration's changes to available federal student loan repayment plans, along with the new Parent Plus loan and graduate school borrowing caps, went into effect July 1st. Currently, the Biden-era SAVE plan is no longer available, causing concern for people who worry about not being able to make higher monthly payments under its replacement, the WRAP plan, which may also increase the so-called marriage penalty for couples who file their taxes together rather than as individuals. Some good news for federal loan borrowers who were defrauded. A lawsuit that was first filed against the Trump administration in 2019 has finally been settled, giving relief to 450,000 people by canceling their student loan debt after they were misled by the schools they were enrolled in. On the private loan side, experts worry that the rise in online education programs coupled with federal borrowing limits may increase predatory lending practices as people cobble together financing for their education. All of this has left many borrowers wondering what their best move might be, while legal challenges against the student loan overhaul continue to play out in court. To help us understand what's happening in the student lending world, our guests today, both calling in on video, are Eileen Connor, lawyer and president and director of the Project on Predatory Student Lending. Eileen, welcome to the show.
Hello.
Also with us, we have Carolina Rodriguez, director of New York's Education Debt Consumer Assistance Program, also known as EdCap. Carolina, welcome.
Good morning.
If you would like to be part of this conversation, you can give us a call at 866-578-0903. You can also send us an email at soi@ideastream.org or message us on Instagram at The Sound of Ideas. Now, Carolina, a lot of the concern over overhauling the federal student loan system is related to the elimination of the Biden-era SAVE student loan repayment plans, SAVE standing for Saving on a Valuable Education. What was good about that plan, Carolina?
One of the key aspects of the SAVE plan is that it was affordable. It had a different formula allowing for borrowers to be able to have a lower payment based on their income. And it also allowed for a shorter time period in terms of forgiveness. People would be able to get forgiveness as soon as 10 years. And now that, as you know, and now borrowers are struggling to figure out what repayment plan they can literally afford.
Carolina, were there any drawbacks to the Biden-era SAVE plan?
So far, based on my experience, there were not. Again, as I mentioned, they had a great formula allowing for borrowers to be able to get a little bit of breathing room in their budget, and it allowed for better options when it came to eventual forgiveness on their loans.
So seemingly then no drawbacks on the borrower side. I guess it could potentially be argued that the drawback on the federal government side might be that earlier path to forgiveness of those loans. Eileen, what are your thoughts on the elimination of this plan? Is it a net positive, negative, or neutral for the country that the SAVE plan is no longer an option for borrowers?
I think generally the chaos that is infused in the student loan repayment system at the moment is net negative for everybody involved. Borrowers have been going through a period of time where, because of litigation and actions of Congress, they've been forced into administrative forbearances that are really just not any benefit to them. So they're not progressing towards any kind of forgiveness. And now people are starting to understand what their options are for repayment and seeing monthly payments that are 3 or 4 times the amount that they had been. They're also seeing that the plans that they had been in, the progress that they had made, they're losing that progress and they have to start again with that 20 or 25-year clock. And so I think for a lot of borrowers experiencing this repayment system, especially those who are their account is wrong or their statements are incorrect and they're unable to get anybody on the phone, it really is something of a nightmare.
Carolina, now tell us about WRAP, or Repayment Assistance Plan, Repayment Assistance Plan. That's what WRAP stands for. That's meant to replace the SAVE plan. How will that work for borrowers, Carolina?
So generally, WRAP is going to calculate your payment based on adjusted gross income. If you are married and file jointly, it would include your spouse's income as well. The challenge with WRAP is that it doesn't account for inflation. So other plans like the IBR plan, income-based repayment, accounts for inflation in the sense that they will use a formula where it's your adjusted gross income minus 150% of the federal poverty level based on your household size. And we can imagine that every year cost goes up. And with the RAP plan, it's just a percentage of your adjusted gross income. Now, for lower income borrowers, RAP seems to be really good in the sense that your payment is going to be, again, flexible on a percentage of your income. And if your payment doesn't cover the interest, RAP is going to waive it. In other words, a key feature of RAP is that you're not going to see your balance grow, which is really critical. RAP also has a $50 principal subsidy, so to speak. The idea is to allow lower income borrowers to little by little tackle their loan balance. However, once you get in the higher income bracket, how do we define higher? From my experience, once you get into the 80,000 income bracket, RAP becomes less generous. And this is the first year of RAP. Given that it doesn't account for inflation, we can foresee in the future that it's going to be less beneficial to borrowers down the line.
Carolina, can you break down for us? You mentioned the issue that comes up with people who are married and if they choose to file their taxes jointly versus individually. That's not necessarily a new issue, but that so called marriage penalty resulting in a higher payment. Can you tell us how that might be more prominent under the RAP program than it might have been under others?
Yes, it's for the similar reason that I was explaining that there's no adjustment in RAP. And so we can expect that again, year by year, if you're a double income household, if your income increases, if your spouse's income increases, you can expect to pay more. The other feature of RAP that I think also plays into this more expensive option, so to speak, is that there is no payment cap, right? Under the IBR plan, there is a payment cap that basically says if your loan balance is usually less than your income, for example, you don't pay more than what you would pay under the 10-year standard repayment plan, what you would pay in 10 years. Under RAP, if you're earning half a million, you are paying probably 10% of that half a million, meaning the adjusted gross. So when it comes to married borrowers, that is actually a question that is coming up in our practice every day. Do we file separately? Do we file jointly? And there's some math involved. We always refer them to their accountant because they have to figure out the benefit of filing jointly or separately for student loan payment purposes, but they may also be losing a lot if they file separately.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a very individual case by case based decision.
Because you do have to take into consideration your tax refund may change, your tax liability may change based on whether you file jointly or separately if you are a married couple. Eileen, how do you feel about this option, RAP, as a replacement for the SAVE plan?
I think that the reality is that for something like 70% of people who are borrowing student loans are going to need to rely on some form of income-based repayment because the standard repayment plan is simply not going to be possible for them to make. And so I think that you can tinker with these repayment plans, but I don't think it's going to change the fundamental affordability issue with higher education. And so I think it has its pluses and minuses. I think another thing that's really concerning about the changes in the student loan program have to do with the limits on graduate lending and Parent Plus lending as well. And I think, as you mentioned at the top, just really considering whether those limits in some ways are necessary. I think that especially at the graduate level, it's been pretty robustly demonstrated that the availability of uncapped amounts of federal student loans for graduate programs has increased the cost of those programs. But I think history has shown that when there's a retraction on the federal side of lending, it's not that those programs cease to exist. It's that people get funneled into private loans that have even worse terms than federal student loans. And so that's something that's very much on our radar at Project on Predatory Student Lending.
Eileen, you mentioned a moment ago about people not being able to get through, not being able to get someone on the phone at the Department of Education. Do you have any insight into what that result is coming from? Is that coming from, do you think, from people, a high level of questions that are calling in, or is that related to staffing cuts that were made at the federal level? What do you think is happening there with the inability to get through to a person?
It's really both. So there's about 700 employees at the Office of Federal Student Aid at the Department of Education right now. That's a 50% reduction from where it was at the end of the Biden administration. And so certainly those cuts have an impact. I think it's also true that coming off of the pandemic repayment pause and then with the confusion around the SAVE plan and the litigation and then the one big beautiful bill, there's just a lot of confusion that would be challenging in the best of circumstances, but with the staffing shortages, I think it's really just a compounding issue.
If you're just joining us here on The Sound of Ideas, we are talking about the student lending landscape, both federal student loans and private student loans. If you want to be a part of this conversation, the number to call is 866-578-0903. You can also send us an email at soi@ideastream.org or send us a message on Instagram at The Sound of Ideas. We do have two experts with us, both in the federal lending and the private lending space. We have an email now in from David B. in Cleveland Heights. David writes, 3 things that I think are important regarding student debt issues. 1, the Biden plan got criticism for being focused only on college debt and ignoring the many people who had or have other debt. 2, when Trump comes in each time, his tendency is to just cancel and oppose everything his predecessors do, even those efforts which were worthwhile. 3, college costs and university debt will continue to rise due to the Trump administration's barring so many foreign students from even coming to the U.S., which provided many institutions of needed tuition, leaving American students to have the burden of higher tuition and housing costs. David B's question is, where is Congress in dealing with this issue? That brings me to a follow-up question for Eileen. Is there any sign of congressional action related to student loan system overhaul? And also, how is it possible for the federal government, how is it legally permissible for the government to unilaterally change student loan repayment agreements for borrowers? Eileen?
So I think that there are a few really interesting points in that email, but just to take your question, there's really no action in Congress right now, except for, of course, the One Big Beautiful Bill, which really did introduce some very seismic changes in the student lending program. It was a budget bill, not a single Democrat voted for it. I think the tie was broken by the vice president to pass that legislation. And it really is sort of once in a generation kind of change to higher education funding. It is somewhat surprising that there are so many borrowers who are midstream in repayment who are impacted by these changes, which are in the course of this budget bill uniquely retroactive. Ordinarily, when bills get proposed to make changes to the federal student loan repayment programs, they're forward-looking only. So people in the programs already can continue paying as they have been. So this is really unique to this bill. I think that there are legal questions about whether those changes, especially to the extent that they make it harder to repay loans or harder to reach that point of ultimate cancellation, whether that was a legal taking or whether that was a legal act by Congress. And with the number of people who are impacted, it's really, I can speak from my own experience representing millions of student loan borrowers, most of whom have been affected by predatory schools. It's really a bipartisan issue. So in a sense, Republicans are responsible for these changes right now, but everybody has constituents who are affected. And so I think the lack of any action in Congress right now is particularly problematic.
If you're just joining us here on The Sound of Ideas, we are talking about federal and private student loans, changes that went into effect July 1st, ongoing legal challenges, and also predatory lending in the private student loan space. If you want to be a part of this conversation, maybe you have a comment you'd like to share, or maybe you have a question for our experts, the number is 866-578-0903. You can also email us at soi@ideastream.org or send us a message on Instagram at The Sound of Ideas. If you didn't catch it at the beginning, the experts joining us today are Eileen Connor. She is a lawyer and president and director of the Project on Predatory Student Lending, and also Carolina Rodriguez, who is the director of the New York-based Education Debt Consumer Assistance Program, or EDCAP. Now, Carolina, for people who were enrolled in the now defunct SAVE plan, again, that was the Biden-era student loan repayment plan that was quite popular, there will now be rolling out of having to make a switch to a different plan. Those are happening in windows, started July 1st when these changes went into effect, the first of these changes. How will people know when they have to make a new selection for their federal student loan repayment plan, Carolina?
Sure. Their student loan servicer is supposed to send them a letter. We've seen servicers send electronic correspondence if they sign up for that. And once you get that letter, it's going to specify that as of the date of this letter, you have 90 days to switch repayment plans. As a result, as you noted, July 1st was the first batch, and there are borrowers who will need to switch by September. So that is happening right now. There's obviously a lot of anxiety, people trying to figure out when to do it. Some people honestly waiting until the very end because they need that extra time to be able to save a little to start those payments if they can afford it at all.
We have an email now in from Alex sharing his experience. Alex writes, I recently reapplied for a repayment plan due to constant emails from both my lenders and the Department of Education. Initially, my repayment amount was to be $1,644.25 per month, which is more than my car note and mortgage combined. Alex writes, this was a result of having withdrawn my prior retirement plan after buying my home as it was needed for repairs. Alex goes on to say, after reapplying with my pay stubs, the repayment was reduced to $554 per month, which is still significantly higher than my prior repayment amount. This is an amount that is not manageable long-term and may risk my ability to maintain home ownership. That is from Alex. So, Carolina, that brings me to a question for you. Depending on when people took out their student loans, they might have other repayment options aside from RAP, which is the new replacement, the new plan. Some of those options include graduated, extended, income-based repayment, which we've mentioned here, IBR. There's also a plan called Pay As You Earn, multiple plans, including the income contingent repayment plan. So many different plans, it can make your head spin. So how should someone decide what program is best for them, Carolina?
You know, everyone focuses on the repayment plan for the right reasons, right? At the end of the day, you want to know whether you're going to be able to actually pay back in a repayment plan that is within your budget. But the best question is, what is your strategy? And I know that sometimes that is hard. If your strategy right now is to pay the lowest amount just to keep your loans in good standing, you would be exploring all the options, whether it's a plan based on income or one of those traditional plans. You can get up to 25, depending if your loans were consolidated, up to 30 years to pay them back. So if that is your strategy, again, you're going to look at every option. Now, if your strategy is forgiveness through the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program or eventual forgiveness through the income-driven repayment forgiveness, you would have to enroll and pay based on your income. And I really recommend borrowers to go back and look at that IBR plan. The ICR and pay will still be available for the next 2 years. And so depending on your strategy, that's what you're going to be looking at. Now, I do want to mention this for people pursuing forgiveness, what I would call eventual forgiveness. You want to be aware of the differences between the IBR plan, which allows you to forgive your loans in 20, 25 years, versus the RAP plan, which increases forgiveness until 30 years. So someone switching from IBR into RAP because RAP is cheaper, for example, may be adding more time towards eventual forgiveness. What about if you're pursuing public service loan forgiveness? The good news there is that as long as you're enrolled in an income-driven repayment plan, you should be able to continue earning credit. So you can choose between IBR, for example, or the new RAP plan. But I always recommend know the pros and cons as you're making that final decision.
Some information to share with our audience here. About 9 million federal student loan borrowers were in default. That was as of March of 2026. That's an increase of over 1 million since the previous quarter. This is according to a June federal student aid report. An additional 3.5 million borrowers were more than 30 days delinquent. So, Carolina, can you tell us what happens for borrowers if they aren't able to make their payment and they do go into delinquency and eventually default?
Yeah. So one of the things I will mention is if you're not going to be able to make a payment, and hopefully this is temporary, you can always call your servicer and ask for a forbearance, or if you're eligible for a deferment. Now, forbearance and deferments are temporary measures, and I want to be mindful that we should not use them as long-term solutions because they're not, right? In prior years, decades, we've seen a lot of borrowers spend years in forbearances and not be able to get anywhere, tackle their debt, or get forgiveness. So I want to start there that if you're really struggling and need a pause, there are options. Call your servicer, they should be able to help you out. But if you're not going to be able to pay, as you mentioned, in about 9 months, 270 days, your loans could technically be considered to be in default status. That obviously gets reported to your credit bureau, and it's going to affect your credit as soon as you stop making payments. Once you're in default, you cannot accumulate credit towards forgiveness. Your balance is growing. There are two options to get out of default. One is rehabilitation, where you make 9 monthly payments within a 10-month period, and then your loans get back into good standing and you continue making payments based on a plan. The other one is consolidation. However, consolidation makes me a little bit nervous now with the new HR1 rules, in the sense that if you consolidate your loans moving forward, whether it's to get out of default or for whatever other reason, you're gonna then be restricted to RAP and the new tier standard repayment plan. You would no longer have access to plans like IBR, which in some cases may be more beneficial.
Mm.
So bottom line, default is a reality. I think a lot of borrowers don't realize yet that the federal government has very powerful tools to collect on the debt. That has been on pause since COVID. But for example, if you're retired and have defaulted loans, the government could take part of your Social Security retirement. Or if you're working, the government could eventually garnish part of your wages. All that is on hold, and my understanding is they will continue to be on hold for the short term, but we don't know when they will resume. And you definitely don't want to be there if you can avoid it.
Hmm. Eileen, please weigh in.
Sure. I really feel for Carolina and people who are helping student loan borrowers navigate through repayment plans. I think sometimes as she was saying, you need to have a strategy. I think one strategy that's not available to people is simply have more money, which is what people mostly need to have in order to be able to afford their student loans in many circumstances. I think another aspect of consolidation and the concern with consolidating is that there's some consumer protections that students can lose when they consolidate, at least the way that the Department of Education is interpreting the rules now. If you consolidate, you will all of a sudden have a 3-year statute of limitations on your ability to assert a defense to your loan, which is something that we've done a lot of work with. It's known as borrower defense. And it is a consumer protection that's available for students who were defrauded and misled about fundamental aspects of their schooling by institutions of higher education. And so I think that's another thing to be aware of.
Eileen, speaking to that point, I want to talk to you about a recent win that the Project on Predatory Student Loans had. Before we do that, I kind of want to set the stage. Can you explain to us accreditation for an educational program and why that's so important?
Yes. So in order to be eligible for federal student aid so that students who are going to an institution can get Pell Grants or borrow federal student loans, an institution needs to be accredited by an accrediting agency that's recognized by the Department of Education. And accreditation is something that's very much in flux right now, with the department having an agenda to recognize new accreditors and in some ways to sanction existing accreditors, mostly for issues that I would put in the bucket of culture war things. What accreditation is supposed to be a check on quality. because the federal government, we don't have a Ministry of Education. They're disavowing sort of any insight into the validity of a curriculum or the necessary learning outcomes. They leave that to the experts, and that's really what accreditation is supposed to encompass. I think in reality, I think that accreditation, once it's attained, is very hard to lose for institutions. And so some of the largest for-profit chains that were operating and have since sort of been demonstrated to have been committing widespread fraud and misconduct were accredited, until the day they filed for bankruptcy, and really not in any danger of losing it. And so in some senses, you have to look behind the accreditation to see the reputation of the accreditor, the other schools that they accredit. And there's also something that's really important to understand, which is the distinction between institutional accreditation and programmatic accreditation. And so if you're going into a specialized program, especially one that leads to licensure, more often than not, it's not just institutional accreditation that's going to be important, it's programmatic. And so the programmatic accreditors really dive into that specialized curriculum. And oftentimes, the passage rates on licensing exams are a requirement or a factor in the validity of the school's accreditation. And so you want to make sure that if accreditation is required, even graduation from an accredited program by a programmatic accreditor in order to sit for a licensing exam, you will not get any benefit out of going to a program that is not specifically accredited in that way if your purpose is to get that license.
Okay. So quick follow-up on that before we get into the details of the Sweet versus McMahon settlement that was a recent win for the Project on Predatory Student Loans. Is there recourse for a student borrower if they've been enrolled in a program that was accredited, took out student loans for that program, but then in the course of being in that program, the program loses accreditation?
That can be the basis of a legal claim if there was misrepresentation or a promise about the status of the accreditation. And oftentimes it's difficult for students to proceed against a school, but if they have federal student loans and in many instances private student loans as well, there is a right to assert that kind of misrepresentation to the extent it occurred around accreditation as a basis for non-repayment of the loan, actual cancellation of the loan. And that again is borrower defense.
Okay. Now tell us, Eileen, about the Sweet versus McMahon settlement. This is a relief for some 450,000 student loan borrowers who were defrauded. Tell us about that.
So this case started back in the first Trump administration when there was a large backlog of these claims of misconduct that students had asserted. And so we brought class action litigation on behalf of all of those people who had submitted applications for borrower defense. And over the course of that litigation, learned a little bit more about the process and how the department was evaluating those applications, and learned that they were not giving them real consideration and were looking for any way possible to deny them. And so we had a lengthy sort of court battle and ultimately entered into a settlement 3 years ago. And that settlement provided, as you said, direct loan cancellation for almost 500,000 individuals with a value of $23 billion. And that makes it the largest settlement that we're aware of against the United States government.
Now, if someone wanted to file a borrower defense claim, do they need to do it through an organization such as the Project on Predatory Student Lending, or is that something people are able to do directly with the Department of Education?
They can do it directly with the Department of Education, and loan servicers should also be aware of this process and be able to direct borrowers to the application.
Okay. If you're just joining us here on The Sound of Ideas, we're having a conversation about changes in the federal student loan system and also how that may impact private student lending and things you need to be aware of if you are in the space of private student lending. The number to call is 866-578-0903 if you want to be a part of the conversation. You can also email at soi@ideastream.org or send us a message on Instagram at The Sound of Ideas. Now, Carolina, this was mentioned earlier. I'd like to get into a little bit of detail about it now. Can you tell us about the caps the Trump administration has recently put in place for graduate school students for borrowing?
Yes. So under HR 1, the One Big Beautiful Bill, a big hallmark is the elimination of graduate plus loans. And that used to allow people going to grad school to be able to borrow up to the cost of attendance. And clearly, people could borrow what they needed more or less in federal loans without having to go to the private space. Under HR 1, if you're going to grad school and it's not considered quote unquote a professional degree, your maximum cap is 100,000, 20,000 per year. If you are considered a professional degree student, then the cap is 200,000, so twice as much. And so there was a lot of backlash, rightfully so, because the Department of Education provided their own definition, which restricted many areas from being able to get up to the 200 cap. And so, as you can imagine, what happens when that is the situation, there have been a couple of key lawsuits challenging that. And now we're a little bit in a holding pattern. The Department of Education did come out as a result of some court rulings so far and expanded their list of what are additional areas consider professional degrees, where they could, at least for right now, borrow the higher amount of 200,000.
The latest lawsuit does mention that some professions that are still excluded include master's degrees in social work, education, and public health, with reporting on that, citing how that might exacerbate short staffing crises in those professions. Eileen, why are these borrowing caps concerning to you as you think about predatory lending?
Well, I think it's a bit of a mixed bag. You're mentioning Masters of Social Work programs, and that's really an area where there's been an explosion of the availability of online programs that are offered by nonprofit institutions of higher education, mostly University of Southern California, Case Western in Cleveland, Fordham, et cetera. And I think that the issue really is that it's a very expensive degree, and there's a high barrier to entry for the profession because you also need to accumulate hours in order to get your license in a state to practice as a social worker. And it's not a high earning field at the outset, yet these programs, especially the online programs, are incredibly expensive. And that was facilitated by this uncapped lending program for graduate students. And so in some senses, there's a hope that it will constrain costs and that tuition will at least level off for these programs. I also think it will have equity impacts on who gets to become a social worker, or who gets to become a doctor, or who gets to become a lawyer, including people who aren't already wealthy or coming from wealthy families. I think the real concern is that we have plenty of evidence about programs at the graduate level that don't pay off. They don't lead to licensure, they don't lead to an earnings boost, and they carry a lot of debt. The hope, I think, the logic of these caps is that those programs will go away. They won't be offered anymore because nobody will be able to afford to pay the tuition, and no private lender doing underwriting would lend to students in that program because they would be unsure that they would actually get the money repaid to them. But unfortunately, there is no functioning market in student loans that we've ever had. And so it's a pretty big gamble. And there's ways that the market can still operate inefficiently so that these programs that are really debt traps, there's no other way to really say it, that they'll continue to exist, and that the loans that are made to students in those programs will actually be worse. They'll have none of the protections or income-driven payment plans that we've been talking about. Yes, they're complicated, but they're better than nothing. They have arbitration clauses. Often they'll have co-signers, so it's not just the student on the hook, it's their family member. And I think that there is a way with ingenuity that lenders would be able to team up with institutions or team up with other banks to find a way that they can insulate themselves from the risk of making loans to students in these programs while still making money. And
Just a
forcing all
moment.
of the rest.
Sorry, Eileen, we just have just a moment here, and I want to make sure that I get a chance to ask Carolina to share with us because there have been significant changes to Parent Plus loans. So, Carolina, can you please share with us what people need to know regarding those?
Yeah. So I think similar to the payment caps that we saw, Parent Plus loans moving forward have a cap of 65,000 per dependent. But aside from that, the biggest changes is that anyone who has a direct Parent Plus loan who didn't consolidate by June 30th with a consolidation disperse is limited to the new tier standard repayment plan. That means that they cannot access a payment plan based on income and they cannot pursue forgiveness. And the number of parents out there who don't know that this is their situation is going to be alarming. And honestly, my team and I keep thinking about, is bankruptcy going to be an option for them then? Because some of them carry very high loan balances. When we look at it, parents who don't have the means may be borrowing about 100,000 per child, right? 25,000 per year to cover living expenses, for example, times four. And so again, moving forward, Parent Plus loan borrowers, anyone who has a direct Parent Plus, it's going to be looking at a very dire situation, and they're not really going to have options when it comes to repayment. They're going to either have a standard repayment plan, but if they take out more loans, it's going to be just a new tier standard.
And there will not be for those newer loans or loans maybe that didn't make the consolidation dead mark for Parent Plus loans. There is no eventual forgiveness. Is that right, Carolina?
That is correct.
Okay. Thank you for sharing that with us. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have today for our conversation about student loans. I want to thank our guests for joining us. Carolina Rodriguez, Director of the Education Debt Consumer Assistance Program out of New York. Carolina, thank you.
Pleasure.
Also, Eileen Connor, lawyer and president and director of the Project on Predatory Student Lending. Eileen, thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us.
Thank you.
We're going to take a quick break now, and when we come back, we'll hear a conversation with musician, singer, songwriter, and composer Jon Batiste, who is performing at Blossom Music Center on Thursday. This is The Sound of Ideas. I'm Stephanie Haney. We'll be right back. You're with The Sound of Ideas from IdeaStream Public Media. I'm Stephanie Haney. Thank you for staying with us. Multi-Grammy award-winning artist Jon Batiste is known for creatively blending genres. This week, he brings his interpretation of Mozart and Beethoven, as well as his originals, to a night at Blossom with the Cleveland Orchestra. The former house band leader for The Late Show with Stephen Colbert and co-composer of Pixar's Soul also just released more music in his piano series. Ahead of Thursday night's concert, Jon Batiste spoke with IdeaStream's deputy editor of arts and culture, Carrie Wise.
Is there a piece in particular, your own or otherwise, that you're looking forward to playing with this particular orchestra?
Oh, wow. Is there a piece? One piece, huh? I'm looking forward to playing Fifth Symphony, Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. I did a version on my album Beethoven Blues called Fifth Symphony in Congo Square. So it's an interpolation of the Fifth Symphony. I'm excited to play that one.
Tell us a little bit about that one.
Oh yeah, so it's great because it goes from the Fifth Symphony theme as the score has it rendered, and then it goes into an African 6/8, which is the African clave, which is the 2 over the 3. And that rhythm plays throughout the orchestra, and there are many different counter themes that I created along with the main Fifth Symphony theme embedded within that African clave. And it feels like an incredible circular, communal, but still very constructed orchestral feeling. So it's a blend of things that I rarely, if ever, hear in an orchestral context, in a symphonic context. It really highlights one of the things I love most about Beethoven is his rhythm and how African his rhythmic sensibility is in all of his work, and how contrapuntal and how syncopated it is, and it creates a momentum that is very exciting it's ripe for possibilities.
You're reimagining some classical music classics with your work with Beethoven and Mozart. What inspired you to do this?
When they were making these compositions, which are among the greatest achievements in the history of humanity, I believe they were vessels for the divine, that they flowed through Beethoven and Mozart, and these are examples of the power of music. And when they were doing this, it wasn't called classical music, what they were doing. We called it classical music as a way to reverse mythologize it and to put it in culture in a certain way. And when they were doing this, the music wasn't as dogmatic to the score and overly reverential to the score. In fact, some of Beethoven's premieres, the scores weren't even complete. It was an iterative process, and they were improvisers, and they were both known to be improvising over a theme or improvising on their way to the finished compositional work, and continuing to iterate upon the composition even after it was on the score, and having different versions that would be in performance, and trading this framework for the contemporary framework of classical music was one of my inspirations, going back to the root of it and trading in the contemporary framework and the contemporary dogma for something that expands the musicianship and expands the canon of classical music. I also think that if Beethoven and Mozart were around for the next 250 years after, there's new forms of classical music. I think you could call Black American classical music now. If you think about folk and jazz and gospel and soul and R&B, rhythm and blues, these are forms of music that are other forms of music from other parts of the world as well, outside of European classical music. Expanding the canon to include those as a part of classic work or classical work is something that also was inspiring to me. Finally, I think about my life and my journey in music, and it's been so many different ways that I've been blessed to have mentors from many different musical lineages. And the ability for me to play classical music as written in the score is something that I enjoy doing, and I want to record someday. But this isn't about my interpretations. This is more about my conversation with the composers and the lineages across time.
What do you think Beethoven and Mozart would think? Do you think they would dig that their music is being reinterpreted?
I'm a huge history buff, and I not only learn the material, but I study all the history, and I read the letters. If you read those incredible letters that are left of us of Beethoven, and you read how he talks about music and the process, and those fellas up the road in Vienna, and Mozart as well, and the way that Salieri and all the competition, and the way that they would improvise and create and iterate on each other's work, and he would be like, you stole that from me, and this is what it was a part of their dialogue, the same way that you look at, the early rent parties in Harlem, and Fats Waller, and James P. Johnson, and, Eubie Blake, the Stride, and Art Tatum, and it seems that human beings are the same everywhere in all periods of time throughout humanity. So artists and genres, the names we put to things and the way we describe them in retrospect are very constricting and not nuanced nearly enough to reflect the actual reality of what these artists and what the craft of what the music that they were a part of was all about. And what I gather is this would be invited not only because it continues their work being contemporized and the legacy of their work in the world, which was something very important to all of the greats, but also I think they would have been competitive about it.
You also have new work paying tribute to Thelonious Monk. Can you talk about his influence on you?
He's my favorite piano player. He's my favorite pianist of all time. He's the greatest. Thelonious Monk, my favorite. and for reasons that are so deeply kindred to my own musical conception. For instance, I remember hearing one of his compositions and not knowing it was his. Someone else was playing it. It wasn't a recording, it was at a jam session. And the composition resonated so deeply with me at the time. I was 18 years old. It felt like something that I was working on, that I was trying to create in my own musical practice, in my own compositional practice. And it was fully realized in this song. And I was like, who wrote this song? This is like, I feel like this is where I'm going. I'm like, this is exactly what I'm trying to formulate in some shape or form right now. And I learned it was Thelonious Monk, and then I listened to him for about a year straight, almost exclusively. And I synthesized that approach, and I always revisit it. And actually, he's very kindred to Mozart in that they're both extremely complex in the symmetry and the logic. It's hyper-logical in the structure of their music, in the melodicism of their music. But it also is super playful and accessible, almost like a nursery rhyme or lullaby. It's something that's hummable and singable. It's like a very childlike. So to have both of those polarities exist in one musical language, in one musical offering, it's very, very unusual. And Monk is an example of that, for sure.
Well, you're traveling the world this summer. What do you take away personally from playing for different people in different places?
I think it's the same thing I take from studying music across time and realizing that people are all singularly unique, and we all have the same hopes and desires and dreams of others that we see, and others from parts of the world who we have yet to meet and never will meet. We share that humanism, and we share that collective consciousness and the humanity that people have. One place is the humanity people have everywhere. And you know, when you meet people, it's easy to other folks when you see them from afar. You put them on a label, or you put a label on folks, and you kind of silo these people over here and those people over there. But then when you go and play and you see people and you're in concert and you meet people and talk to them and shake their hand, and you see their kids or their grandparents, and you see the way the music brings people together, and it's like, oh, we're all born the same. So that's what I see, that's what I feel, and that's why I do it.
We are born the same. Return to that place. Return to that place. Return to that place. Return to that place. We are born the same. Return to that place. We are born the same. Return to that place. We are born the same. Return to that place. Oh my father, oh my brother, oh my mother, oh my sister, oh my father, oh my mother, oh my brother, oh my sister, oh my mother, oh my father, oh my brother, oh my mother, oh my sister, oh my brother, oh my father, oh my mother, oh my father, oh my mother, oh my sister, oh my
That was John Batiste speaking with IdeaStream's Carrie Wise. He plays with the Cleveland Orchestra Thursday night at Blossom Music Center, and his latest piano albums on Thelonious Monk and Mozart are out now. The track you're hearing, by the way, is Worship from his 2023 album World Music Radio. If you missed any part of today's show, you can hear a rebroadcast tonight at 9 on 89.7 WKSU. You can also find every episode of The Sound of Ideas wherever you get your podcasts and on the IdeaStream Public Media YouTube page. To get the last word on today's topics, you can email us at soi@ideastream.org, and you can find us on Instagram at The Sound of Ideas. On Thursday, we talked about fracking in Ohio and how our state is importing a significant amount of toxic fracking wastewater as we're learning the injection wells holding that wastewater are leaking. Tom emailed in. The entire process or life cycle of this industry appears to be being mirrored with the rapid build-out of data centers, and they are bound to have similar results, ending with environmental calamity, lack of accountability, and maybe a few slap-on-the-wrist fines to the billionaires who already made their money and moved to Florida to spend it. Tom, thank you very much for sharing your thoughts. Tomorrow on The Sound of Ideas, we'll hear how special considerations are important for doctors who are treating high-risk pregnancy patients in a world after the overturning of Roe v. Wade. I'm Stephanie Haney. Thank you very much for keeping the conversation going. We hope you've had a good start to your week. We'll see you back here tomorrow on The Sound of Ideas.
The Sound of Ideas is produced by Rachel Rude, Drew Mazius, Aya Cathy, and Claire Delvita. Our technical producer is Chris Dudley. Jay Nungesser and Igal Kaufman are at the controls of the Ohio Channel broadcast, and our host is Stephanie Haney. Thanks so much for listening.